Welcome to the first podcast of our Afterwords. I'm Dawn from Bang Bang Books.
I am Lynette from Charmingly Simple.
And we just started co-blogging, like, how long has it been? Like 3 weeks or so?
Yep, about 3 weeks.
Yeah. So we'll probably launch our Afterwords. Well, it'll be launched when you get this podcast, so check it out. Okay. We're gonna do podcasts every other week, probably, and it'll be an arc and then a published book. And so for this one, we're going to do a published book, and we're going to do The Legacy of Kings by Eleanor Hermon. We're just going to talk about the book. This beginning part will be spoiler-free, but if you just keep listening, we'll go into more spoilers. So don't worry about being spoiled about anything. Okay. Lynette, you ready?
Yep.
All right. So Legacy of Kings, once again, is by Eleanor Hermon. It is book 1 in the Blood of Gods and Royals quartet. So that means there will be 4 books in the series. Just FYI, Legacy of Kings will be made into a TV show, probably on the CW or the WB. I don't know if that's the same thing. But it's being produced by Wallowitz from Big Bang Theory. I don't know when that's going to happen. They just announced that like last week. So I'll be looking out for that. I'm pretty interested. Okay, so the background of Legacy of Kings, well, the plot of it is it's basically a reimagination of Alexander the Great, and it's told from 7 different point of views. So Alexander is the main character, and his whole thing is to prove himself to his father. Everyone's teenagers, so they're around 16 or 17 years old. And then Alexander's best friend, is it Hef?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm really bad at pronouncing names. Hef is Alexander's best friend and the captain of the guard. Cleopatra, or Cleo, is his sister, and she is seeking immortality. Kat is another character. She's not part of their family. Her mother used to work for the queen, and she wants answers as to why her mother died. So she's seeking answers about her mother. And then the queen, Olympia, is it Olympia?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I didn't have the book to reference it again, so sorry. So Olympia, she's desperate to bring back her cursed lover by any means necessary. And then we have Jacob, who is in love with Kat, and he wants to prove his manhood by being a fighter. So he wants to prove himself before he asks her to marry him. And then the final character is Sophia, and she is the betrothed princess to Alexander, who has a very big secret. So those are all the characters, and they all have their own chapters. But it's not hard to follow along because it's told in third person, so you know who is talking when it's their turn. So as I said before, it is a reimagination of Alexander the Great. Just a disclaimer, my world history knowledge is pretty poor. I didn't take world history in high school or college, so I had to do some Wikipedia on this one. And from my research, the real Alexander the Great, his mother was Olympia. She was part of a snake cult, and she was said to sleep with snakes. I believe in Eleanor Hermon's version, she does a little bit more than sleeping with them, but okay. Cleo, he does have a sister named Cleopatra, and Hef is his best friend and captain of the guard. They were believed to be lovers, but that was never said that was actually a thing. Is there any other history? Lynette is more of the historian than I am. Is there any other things that I missed?
That actually is a pretty good representation. Other than Alexander the Great ended up conquering a good portion of the known world in his history time. He was a pretty badass.
So just a little bit of background about Eleanor Hermon. She is a New York Times bestselling author, but she's written adult nonfiction. She's pretty much an historian. She goes all over the world. She's been to not been to ancient, obviously she hasn't been there, but she's been to Rome, and she does a lot of history, and so she's pretty knowledgeable about what she's talking about. But this is her first foray into YA. And I kind of have an opinion about this. There's kind of a trend now for adult fiction writers to turn to YA, like Dan Brown and James Patterson, and there's one more that has the Theodore Boone author teen lawyer series. I can't remember who it is, but yeah. I feel like they're just trying to make a quick buck off of teens. I don't know. What do you think, Lynette? I don't know.
Honestly, I agree with that. My first impression to this book was I was really excited because, like Don said, I have always loved history and especially ancient Greece / Rome. It has always interested me, especially Alexander the Great and stories of him, and finding out that the author is actually a historian of sorts and knows her stuff. It really was one of my most anticipated reads of this year.
Wow. That's cool. It was not my anticipated read of the year. I got the book at ALA Midwinter in Chicago. If you don't know what ALA is, it's an organization for librarians, and they have 2 conferences every year, and anybody can go to them to the exhibit hall. It's like $50 or $60 to go, and you can come away. I think I came away with over 100 books in Chicago. So I got it there. I just kind of happened along the Harlequin booth, and I was like, oh, and they were really talking about it. I was like, sure, I'll take it. It had no cover. It was just purple. I was like, oh, whatever. And it sat on my shelf for months and months. And then my coworker, who is also really into history, she read it and told me that it was really good and that I should read it. And so I started reading it, and I read it in June. So that was my interest, or lack thereof, in it at first. And then there was a lot of hype on Twitter about it that I noticed.
Oh, Twitter hype.
Yeah. But sometimes that could be a bad thing. It's like, oh, is it really worth the hype? So I was still a little not quite sure if I wanted to read it just because of that, which I shouldn't be that way, but whatever. I'm glad I read it. At least I can say that I read it.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing that we're going to go into is, first we're going to talk about our dislikes of the book. And the reason why we would like to end this podcast on likes, just as a positive note, especially for those books that we find aren't to our liking, because each of us have our own opinions, and just because we're here talking about ours doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad book.
Yeah. So you can probably guess where we're going with this book. I'll let you start with the not so gushy.
Okay. My initial dislike for this story was, I like to know characters before romance starts or big things happen in books. And I feel like the author rushed a lot of the beginning and a lot of the story to begin with. I guess what I'm saying is, just like Dawn said earlier, I feel like the author wrote the book with the expectation of how YA was supposed to be or read, and it came out in a lot of the things that she wrote. Do you agree, Don?
Yeah, I agree. One of my, well, it wasn't my biggest problem, but one of the smaller problems was that I felt like she did a good job, as far as I can say, as character development. It's a pretty small book. It's only like 380 pages. It's not a big book as far as height. Teen books tend to be smaller in height than adult books. And So her book was smaller. If you compare it to like an Ember and Ashes or Air of Fire, those books are pretty big. And compared to that, hers was pretty small. And for her to cram 7 characters into one book was pretty genius on her part, and to get some character development. And that's what I really liked about the beginning of the book, was all this character development. But then what happened, I felt like she thought, oh, it's too wordy and maybe I need to throw a war in there. So she just kind of dropped all the storylines and then added some random war, which that was stupid. So that was one of my biggest problems. Is it started off really well, and then I felt like she just had to dumb it down for teens, because I guess she thought teens didn't have the attention span for character development and world building. I don't know. And she just threw in this horrible war. So yeah, that was one of my dislikes.
Yeah. One of my second dislike, and it actually was one of, I wouldn't say my biggest, because I already, lay that out on the ground. But I actually genuinely like multiple points of view characters. I love Game of Thrones, and like I was telling Dawn earlier, I kind of steer away from books that compare, because it gives an expectation, sometimes too much expectation and a lot of hype. And this one was geared towards the YA version of Game of Thrones. And one of the things in Game of Thrones that they do very, very well is not a lot of the scheming is told. But it's very hard for Eleanor had an issue with this, I guess. I don't want to give anything of the plot away, because that's going to be later, but it's just, I feel like if there's going to be plotting, it should probably be behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. And it was a lot of plotting by one character, right? It was Cleo that did most of the plotting.
Yes, and the scheming, and it made one of the other characters look pretty dumb.
Yeah. And that is my second dislike of the book. I felt like a lot of the decisions made by the characters were horrible. And when I say a lot, I mean all. Like, all of the characters made some really bad decisions, or Hef, who was being snowed by this girl, was like totally oblivious to it. Like, oh God. Every time his character came on, I was angry, because I wanted to like Hef. He seemed like he would have been a wonderful character. But man, she did not do him justice at all.
Yeah. Well, I think that kind of sums up our dislikes.
Oh no, I have one more.
Oh, okay.
I have one more. Is that the first half of the book, once again, is all this character development, all these characters and what they want out of life. They all want something. They want validation from a parent, or they want love, or they want answers about their parent, or their mother. They all want something, and it was good. It was really good. And then in the first half of the book, they do mention something about other nations don't want magic. Magic is bad. They want to eradicate it. It was mentioned briefly. And then the whole second act of the book was about this war that was mentioned briefly. And I just felt that wasn't done really well. If you guys have read The Orphan Queen, in The Orphan Queen, it's the same scenario where they want magic eradicated because it's causing badness in their world. And one nation's like, no, I'm not signing your treaty. And then they basically say, okay, you screwed yourself when you didn't sign the treaty. And that's what the whole book is about. But with this one, it just kind of came out of nowhere. And then all the other storylines were dropped, or they were summed up in a neat little bow. And that was my major problem with the book. And that's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil anything. So that's all I'll say about that part.
Okay, so like I said earlier, this is the part where we're going to say what we like. And the thing that I like about this story, and will probably make me maybe read the second one if I get the chance.
You're going to read the second one?
I'm going to give it a try.
Okay, good for you.
But was the world building in itself. Like I said earlier, I love the history behind this book, and the author does a very good job at bringing the world in itself to scope. And my main thought for this book is that I am happy that it's going to become a movie or a TV series, because I think that it will gain a lot more of maybe the people who didn't like the book, because I think some of the dislikes for the book itself will be ironed out in the TV series. What do you think, Dawn?
Yeah, I think like that TV show, The 100, that book did not go out in my library at all, but the TV show seemed to do well. At least I saw it on Twitter. Everyone was watching it. I tried the first episode. I didn't like it, but I'm also kind of picky. So, but I think people will hope if they do it right, then people will start to pick up the books. So, yeah.
I mean, because there is this whole phase of like Rain, which is
I
think Mary Scott's and stuff. So people really like history. So if they do it right, I'm sure that this book is going to be a very good TV series.
Yeah, it's not boring. I will say that. It's not a boring book. There are lots of things are happening. It's never dull. So that's good. That wasn't one of my likes, but one of my likes was I do like different POVs. I know a lot of people don't because they get confused when they can't discern who's talking. But this one is told in third person, so like I said, you know exactly who's talking. Any other likes you had?
No, that was pretty much it.
I did like the Queen. I read a lot of high fantasy and they tend to be repetitive. And I think that she had her magic or her cult snake and her whole magic with that was pretty interesting. And also Cleo, I won't spoil it, but she had her own little magic thing going. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. I was far more interested in those two characters than anybody else, including Alexander. So I did like their storylines. The Cleo storyline was one of the ones that got cut off by the knees. The Queen, however, her storyline still continues, and I think it's pretty much the driving force of that book. So, but I like that, and I also like the cover. I think the cover is pretty good. And
they did a very good job with picking that cover.
Yeah. So those are all my likes.
Okay. I think now it's going to be into what's going to be next for us.
The rating. What did we rate it?
I think that if we were to rate it on a 1 to 5 scale, it would be a 3. And if we were going to rate it on a word, I'd say meh.
Yeah. On my blog, I rated it as a 3 or a 2 3/4. On Goodreads, I did a 3 because you can't do like quarter stars on Goodreads. They need to fix that quickly. But yeah, I say a solid 3. As far as we'll go into like other books that are similar to it. If you read the book and you were kind of like us, like it's a 3, but you like the genre and you want something similar, I would say my recommendation would be Falling Kingdoms. I know Lynette doesn't like it's Game of Thrones for teens. I know she doesn't like that. But Fallen Kingdoms was also marketed as Game of Thrones for teens. And it's very similar. It's only 4 points of view this time instead of 7. And with Fallen Kingdoms, though, they have a very simple plot. To get the 3 crystals, or I think it's 3 or 4 crystals, I don't remember, and get them together so that something happens. And that's what they're all looking for, are the 3 crystals. And there are 6 books in that series. Book 4 will be published in December. Have you read the Fallen Kingdoms series?
Nope.
No. Yeah. It's I really like Cleo. There's another Cleo in this one. And Magnus. I know. Cleo and Magnus, I love them, especially Magnus. You just want to hug him. You feel so bad for him because he wants his father to love him, but his father is the evil one. He's the bad guy, and he's a horrible, horrible king. And he wants to approve of his father, but he doesn't want to be like his father. And then
like Alexander.
Huh?
Kind of like Alexander in this book.
Yeah. And Cleo is a pretty great heroine. I put her right up there with Selena from Throne of Glass and Kestrel from Winter's Curse. She's really good. And so that's what's keeping me going with that series. And I think the other recommendation I would give is Ember in the Ashes, only because of the setting. Ember in Ashes also takes place in ancient. It's an alternate universe or an alternate dimension or whatever you want to call it. But it's Game of Thrones-esque. Game of Thrones, I'm sorry. Legacy of Kings, and it's got like the Colosseum type of thing, an arena and all that. It is told in 2 POVs. So I would recommend those 2 if you want something similar to Legacy of Kings.
Okay. I don't have any recommendations because I'm behind the game, obviously.
Okay. Well, our next podcast will be September 15th, and we will be talking about Truth Witch. That does not come out until January. That book has been hyped to death, and so I'm curious to see if it lives up to the hype. I have not started it. Lynette has, and she's not giving me much hope right now. So, but I will. That's my next to read. I'll be starting that tomorrow. So join us on September 15th. Here you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow our blog. It's ourafterwords.com, and like us on Twitter. Once again, it's ourafterwords. And if you stay on to this broadcast, we will do the spoiler version. So thanks for listening. If you're done with the spoiler-free version, and stay on the air for our rants and raves. Okay.
Probably more rants than raves.